Hey folks, welcome to the Unsung Podcast, happening remotely this particular time. I am Mark. I'm joined by Christopher, who's at the other side of the same city as me.
It's a wee bit of COVID nostalgia, isn't it? We kind of missed that feeling of time lag and trying to have a conversation when things are buffering. So thought we'd take a step back in time. I think in the future people will do that for retro kicks. Reduce the bandwidth and have a bit of fun trying to talk over each other.
Yeah, and to help us facilitate this particular exercise today, we are joined, of course, by Ferruccio, all the way from Bologna.
Hello, greetings from Bologna. It's very hot in here.
How hot is it there, Ferro?
37 today degrees. Celsius. Is it the Celsius scale we're using here in Europe? Yes,
we use Celsius. It's America. They use Fahrenheit, don't they? Which is Fahrenheit. I don't understand.
Use Celsius.
I prefer to use Kelvin. So what would that be? 37 Celsius is 310 degrees Kelvin. I don't know how that works. Anyway, okay, welcome to the show, Ferruccio. We kind of teased this last week. We are doing a special episode this week. Special in the sense that it's been hastened by unfortunate events. It's something that we always intended to do. So I'm a huge fan of the band Hot Snakes. I'm a huge fan of a number of the bands around in the orbit of the members of Hot Snakes, as I know you are, Ferro and Mark. I wasn't really sure how familiar you were with them, but this episode was hastened by the passing of Rick Froberg, for all intents and purposes one of the main two people in Hot Snakes. We'll talk a wee bit about Rick's legacy musically, the various projects he's been in. We're going to skim by them. We're not going to focus on them too much because they need to be done justice. This episode is very much to try and focus on the band Hot Snakes. And one of the problems we were faced with was not being able to decide which of their albums to do. It's a nice problem to have. It mainly comes from the fact that they were such a consistent band. But what we decided to do was something that we've done a couple of times in the past, is go head to head, which at least enables us to cover 100% more in terms of detail. So, Ferruccio, for the purposes of this show, you have chosen which album?
Audit in Progress from 2004.
Audit in Progress, and I have chosen Suicide Invoice from 2002. So we will swap notes and swap punches very shortly. Before we do that, Mark, do we have any admin to get out the road?
Of course. Welcome to Ross Towns, and welcome back to Scott Walker. Thank you for joining us on our Patreon, which is patreon.com/unsungpod. We have some cool stuff that we do there. You can do what these guys did and just join at the lowest tier for £4 or €5 or $6. I don't know what it is in American money. But you can get access to bonus episodes. You get these episodes a couple of days earlier on the Friday instead of the Monday. And you get access to our AAA Facebook group where you can, as we say in Scotland, bam us up and just ask us and talk a whole lot of nonsense to us and tell us when we've fucked up recordings or uploaded up recordings, which happens very recently.
Thanks for that, everybody.
So yeah, you can do that. Or if you want to kind of get the full unsung experience, we have a record club where we send you out records every month, be it digital or analog, depending on what tier you want to go for. But we've recently got a whole bunch of new stuff. We're going to get some more new stuff. We keep buying new stuff. It's going to be sick, really.
And we're buying it directly from the artists or their labels. Yeah. These are small artists and small labels, so the money is going back into the people who need it to keep doing what they're doing. It's a damn sight better than the revenue you get from Spotify and so on. So if you like supporting small and independent artists, then give it some thought. As you know, Mark mentioned with Scott, you can dip in and dip out. If you want to do a month and treat yourself and see if you like what you get, then try it and then cancel it if you're not feeling it. But you can do that as often as you want, and you can sort of tailor what you get as well. It's not just like we send you a random thing. You know, there are kind of categories. You can pick a presenter to curate it, and we'll try and work to your tastes somewhat.
Yeah.
But yeah, it keeps us going. It gives us a little bit of money for all the time we put into this, but it also keeps a lot of these bands going and gets them a bit of money. And the reaction is is amazing actually when you contact someone out of the blue and say, hey, we want to send your record to people all over the world. I mean, we had this exact conversation with Foe, who are based in London, haven't been a band for a while, albeit they're still doing other things, and they were over the moon that somebody had randomly heard this great record that they did years ago and now wanted to make sure that other people got to hear it. So yeah, it's exciting for everyone involved. So, you know, treat yourself.
Yeah. Give it a bash. What you got to lose?
Money.
Yeah. And maybe some respect for us if you don't like our taste when we send you something, but we'll cross that bridge when we come.
I'm doing my best to erode the respect for us as well by making grievous errors in the edits of episodes. Thanks to everybody that flagged that up in the last episode. We had a bit of a dog glitch, let's call it that.
Yeah.
But sorted. The last episode actually was a two-parter. Really, it's gone down really well. It was about one album wonders, bands who only released one full record, studio record, try to specify, be a bit more precise. We also had requests. We had a request via YouTube that we list all of the music featured in the episodes. Now, I will on this occasion try and make that happen. The only thing is, we cut a lot of music into our shows, especially those two episodes are great examples of that. We try to put in bits to kind of illustrate to you what we're talking about. I like that when I listen to stuff as well. I like a little example, a little flavour, and it's just an awful lot of work. And frankly, this is already quite a lot of work, this show, so we have toyed with the idea. I tried to put out playlists of it in the past, but it's so intensive hour-wise to hit the turnaround at the moment that sometimes that's just not possible. I'll try and do it with those episodes, but yeah, I can't promise it every single time, I'm afraid. Unless somebody wants to come and work for us as an unpaid intern, simply doing a playlist of everything that's in the episode. In that case, we could probably come to some arrangement.
Yeah, and if you are a nice soul and you think you can do the playlist yourself and want to send us a link to it, and then we can promote it, then you can do that too.
Crowdsourcing it.
Crowdsourcing it.
Yeah. No minimum wage here, 0-hour contracts. Right, let's get into the show because we've got quite a lot to cover. Ferruccio, you are a punk rock encyclopaedia. We know this. And I also a member of the band Cut. One of the things that always jumped out to me about Cut from the very first time I heard you guys, I mean, full disclosure, my own band and your band did a split EP way back in the day, and I remember when we first heard your stuff, the three of us in our band at the time saying, oh man, Hot Snakes, this is amazing. And it was just an influence that really, really jumped out, and I love it. It was something that I've seen woven. I mean, a lot of influences in your music, especially for people that are aficionados in that genre, garage punk, but I hear a lot of the Hot Snakes bits in there, some of the riffs, that kind of downstroke Telecaster vibe, that all that kind of stuff. So there will actually be a few points in this show where I want to let off a Cut alarm, which I'm like, this one really reminds me, this track or this bit or this riff really reminds me of Cut. But yeah, I couldn't think of anybody better to get on to discuss this band and try and do them a wee bit of justice. Maybe our mutual friend Brian McGarvey could have helped as well, but I think, you know, it's quite a personal subject. Rick's loss has been felt by a lot of people on that music scene, so yeah, we'll just try and do it as tactfully and as faithfully as we can.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for that. I mean, obviously, Hot Snakes are a band that we listened to a lot. Funnily enough, they formed later than us. They formed 3 years later than us.
No,
we were already active in 1996, and they formed in 1999, if I'm correct. But obviously, whatever these guys have done, even previous to the Hot Snakes, previously was influential to us, you know. So the whole scene that you know revolved around Rick Froberg and John Reis has been so important to us, you know, because you know it kind of brought together two things that we like a lot, which is visceral, feral rock and roll with a little bit of a, you know, I wouldn't say innovation, but you know, trying to make things always interesting, always trying to develop stuff in a way that it's not unexpected without losing that primal energy, you know. So great source of inspiration, obviously.
So as I mentioned as well, we planned this for quite a long time, but you know, life has that way of offering you reminders that the best laid plans of mice and men aft gang of gley, and Rick passed away on June the 30th. What age was he when he died?
I think 58.
58. It was
I guess so, yeah.
I thought it might be 55, but an undiagnosed heart condition. Very sudden. Has clearly taken a lot of people by a massive surprise. You see it in the reactions and in the testimonials and the obituaries that are circulating. Mark, is Hot Snakes a band you'd spent any time with before we did this?
Not really. The only bands in this orbit that I've really spent any time with was the first Like Jehu record, and bits of Rocket from the Crypt here and there. I think they're actually quite an influential band in a lot of the kind of punk bands I like. But I'd heard the name Hot Snakes, and I had listened to Suicide Invoice before. I didn't realise it until I listened to it for this podcast. I'd actually heard it before. And I don't know why I didn't listen to more of it, because I actually quite enjoyed it, and it's the kind of stuff that I like. You know, it's like angular, post-hardcore, but with a real 60s garage feel.
Yeah. I mean, Hot Snakes to me are, I would say, one of my favourite bands, maybe top 10 in terms of their sheer consistency and just where they landed musically. I love them, and I think like this death is similar to me to maybe Mimi Parker. You know, these aren't people I was personally friends with. I've met Rick, actually. He's a really pleasant guy. He did an original drawing that's hanging up in our bar, framed. That's how highly we thought of the guy. But yeah, something about Rick and Mimi's passing has a similarity. I think there's a selfish aspect. There's a sense that I won't be able to go and see two of my favourite bands again, and Low and Hot Snakes in particular, because even though they kind of toured sporadically, you always knew they were out there, and you always kind of knew they might come back around, and it was something really special when it did happen. And I've travelled, out with the country to see this band. They're a destination band. You get really excited when they're even close. I think there's also a kind of very human similarity to the way they came across in their music. Neither with Low or nor with Hot Snakes did you get the sense of a rock star on a pedestal somewhere up there out of reach. You got this just sense of just two people that happen to be professional musicians in one capacity or another, who were very approachable and very down to earth, and they just always came across well in any press that they did. They all seemed to get the absurdity of it, as well as genuinely love what they were doing, and there's something about that as well. It feels like a person died, not like a celebrity died. Does that make sense? I don't know. It's hard to know how to react sometimes when, sorry Mark, but Prince is dead. I mean, it's Prince. It's almost like a film character to me. There's no sense of personal connection to that. But for some reason, I think these kind of folks, Mimi and Rick, they feel really different.
Yeah, I mean, it's people that are accessible. They feel as though you could just bump into them in the street or meet them in the pub or whatever, do you know what I mean? And I really like your music and have a chat with them, It doesn't feel
I don't know if you'd meet Mimi Parker in a lot of pubs.
But do you know what I mean though? Like the same kind of vibe. Like it feels as though it's somebody you could just meet walking down the street, and
I know
not a lot of people would maybe really know who they are unless they were really into that band. And I think there is something a little bit more tragic when it is someone that's not a superstar who's in an act that you really admire. They feel more human. Yeah, but Prince is a good example. Like when he passed, it was just like a star burning out. I'm sure it felt like a huge loss to a lot of people, but I mean, I was gutted obviously, but I wasn't like, oh shit, man.
It feels like the end of Game of Thrones or something like that when someone that famous dies. It's like, oh, they've brought a show that I liked to an end. There's something very abstract about it.
Yeah, it's remote.
I mean, Hot Snakes were reportedly in the middle of producing their 5th album when Rick died, and John Reis, who is his long-term sort of musical collaborator, we'll discuss that in a bit more depth shortly, has said, I'm just lost without him. I don't know what to do now. The more I wrote notes for this episode, the more the episode began to feel like a testament to enduring friendship and collaboration. I mean, Ferro, I know that you'll probably have a similar thing with Carlo in your band. I've been in multiple bands with my friend, my colleague Colin, and there is something very relatable about that, about two people that click so well that they actually are able to span decades of work together, not just the odd dalliance. I think my heart ached quite a bit for John Reis as well. He really has lost a partner in Yank crime there.
Yeah.
Excuse the pun.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, throughout the years, I mean, Pitchfork and Like Jehu, and then of course Hot Snakes. I mean, when Hot Snakes came together, if I remember correctly, they didn't even include necessarily Rick Froberg.
That's right. Yeah.
It was later on. I mean, as soon as they started that Joe Reis, we need Rick, we need this musical companion I had with me all my life to get this thing going. And exactly. I mean, my band cut make no sense without, for sure, without Carlo. I don't know without me. Maybe they'll find a way to continue without me. But obviously, without Carlo, if Carlo had to quit the band or anything would happen to him, I hope not. There would be no reason to continue with Cut, because he's been there since the first day, because the way we sounded, the tone of the band is so determined by, his guitar playing, that it makes no sense to try to reproduce it with another person, So, I mean, I don't understand completely because luckily for me, I haven't been through that. But, I imagine that, losing such an important musical friend, to make things fall apart.
It's interesting as well because, as we'll touch on very shortly, so much of what they do that makes them special is about the way they interconnect as musicians, is about that clicking together. And we're actually kind of lucky because John Reis and Rick Froberg have done different projects, and that sort of enables you to hear some aspects of what they do when they're separated in a kind of like, it's almost a bit of a sort of scientific sort of study where you're able to sort of hear, okay, that's the bit that he kind of brings there, and then when they're put back together again, it is more than a sum of its parts, I think. As you said, I mean, Rick wasn't even originally in Hot Snakes. It was John that started it, and then just he wanted that vocal power. John didn't think his own vocals were really doing it. But we'll go into that in a wee bit. So, very, very brief history. I mean, first off, Rick Froberg was born in California in the late 60s. You may notice his name differently in different things. So his dad actually changed the family name to Farr, F-A-R-R, and some pictures, some of his illustrations have Rock Farr or Rick Fork on them as a signature, but he actually stuck with Froberg throughout his career. I believe that his favourite band was AC/DC. Although there's loads and loads of other influences mentioned, all the way from Status Quo through to the Wipers through to much more modern stuff. Rick and John met in 1986 at a picnic in San Diego, organised by an anarchist publication, I believe. John Reis had a couple of high school bands in his younger years, Coitus Interruptus and Conservative Itch. Rick Froberg had actually started his musical career as one of the drummers / percussionists in a group called Crash Worship. Which is kind of like a long-running, a sort of avant-garde art project band thing that would do... other than just the music, I think they had like 3 stand-up percussionists, but other than just that, they would do things like shower the audiences in blood and honey and perform gigs in completely blackened out rooms and stuff like that. So it was quite avant-garde. But he was playing drums initially. Apparently he tentatively sort of started learning guitar in his teens, but he never saw himself as much of a player. But something that's cropped up in other shows, not least of all in the Sonic Youth show itself, is that he is somebody who in the early to mid-80s had doors opened for him by the approach of bands like Sonic Youth. By the unfussy democratization of guitar playing. You didn't have to shred, you didn't have to spend 5 hours sitting in the end of your bed learning like scales. You could actually just use it as an expressive tool, as a medium, and hack a sound out of it. And I personally really relate to that as well. I was never and will never be a technically very gifted guitarist, but these kind of artists opened that door to people that had something else to say, and it's definitely something that's equally valid. It maybe doesn't have that 10,000 hours of rehearsal in it, but I think you'd be hard pushed to say it's not as culturally or socially significant, especially in the way that allows people from sometimes quite limited backgrounds the punk movement's a great example, the garage movement. But so same with techno music, to come from these backgrounds and just make a noise and make it matter. The gatekeeping of, hours and hours and hours of practice and being incredibly gifted is gone. And Rick Froberg freely admitted that he was one of those people that really allowed him to become a musician. That sense of encouragement that he got from groups like Sonic Youth in the mid-80s. Now, Ferro, you mentioned Pitchfork. The first real band, as he describes it, was Pitchfork. That began in 1986 and was really inspired by that SST touch and go scene. It's no relation to the magazine, by the way. It was Rick Froberg on vocals, John Reis on guitar. The band had actually split by the time their Eucalyptus album came out, and Mark, funnily enough, this would have been the perfect conjoiner between this and last week's episode, because Pitchfork are a one-album band and we didn't include them. But Eucalyptus was that record, and Froberg, as would become a pattern, did the artwork on Reis produced the record. There's lots of really interesting ideas in the Pitchfork stuff. The guitar interplay is pretty unorthodox. There's hooks on it and guitar lines on it that are kind of miles away from being your template of a guitar riff. There's some unusual things coming out of this very primitive soup of ideas that these young guys have at that time. Just before we go into any sort of detail, we can't really spend too much time in it. There's a bit of palm mutes, there's a lot of percussive use of the strings. The album, I think, is a bit light on hooks, but I do think it would appeal to, for example, a lot of Discord Records fans, because they formed in the same year as Fugazi. They would have been peers, at least for a while, of Jawbox. And I think bands like Blue Tip really, really took a lot from that sound. Actually, I think, there's a few of the Pitchfork songs could be Blue Tip songs and vice versa. Which I think you can really hear on tracks. There's a track in it called Twitch. I'll put a wee sample in. I think you can actually really hear it on that. So this was kind of post-hardcore before there was post-hardcore. They were using punk conventions but folding in a lot of noise rock and arty Sonic Youth stuff, and basically one of the first people building, along with Fugazi, building a rudimentary template for that post-hardcore genre. It's very, very influential stuff, and it's amazing when you find out how early it came out.
Oh yeah, that's incredible. I mean, I think they have no relation to the magazine, as you said, but I think those guys who started Pitchfork, I think they had Pitchfork in mind when they started, I guess, and now pretty decadent and terrible webzine like Pitchfork.
Apparently, the official line with Pitchfork magazine, I'm inclined to agree with you there, but the official line is that it's something to do with Scarface, a tattoo in the movie Scarface. But that doesn't really seem all that connected, but there you go. That's supposedly the version.
all my friends in the post-hardcore, I mean, this new musical sensibility that came out at the beginning of, I would say, the late 90s, or also mid 90s, I would say. I mean, they were like idolizing that album. I mean, they were like together with Drive Like Jehu, but they were totally in awe of the first Pitchfork album. Sorry, I mean, and Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's a pretty acerbic sound. Not many hooks. It's harsh. It's a harsh album. But it's so expressive. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's got an intensity that it was typical of that era in terms of the first experiments with post-hardcore bands like Rites of Spring, and also SST bands. I think it's a kind of a mixture between some kind of almost the post-punk psychedelics that you were hearing from the SST bands, and the more straightforward approach of the Washington DC bands, Discord bands, somewhere in between. It often happens that in Texas, bands from Texas have this capacity of this capability of merging characteristics of the two coasts. Think about a band like 13th Floor Elevators. They were kind of somehow a bit San Francisco, but also very much like New York. You know what I mean?
Same way at the Drive-In, which is a band that will get mentioned as well, combining elements of the DC scene and some of the West Coast stuff. Yeah,
exactly.
There's a very good interview online between Jim of At the Drive-In and Rick sitting talking about it in detail, and Jim saying how huge an inspiration this was on his work. A lot of the same things we're saying. He didn't think he was a good guitarist, but this kind of opened it up to him and convinced him that he could do it.
History, feel the pitch blistering between dreams, cause I'm still not listening. Xbox is smart on your calendar days.
And things like the percussive use of the guitar, using it in unorthodox ways, because you weren't married to the technicality of it, you just wanted to make sound. So
Omar from At the Drive-In and the Mars Volta says the same thing, but he's often been on record as saying that he always feels like he's fighting the guitar when he's playing it, because it's the only instrument he really knows how to play, and he is really fucking good at it, to be fair, but it never sounds conventional. It sounds as though he is locked in a battle to the death with it to try and make it sound how he wants it to sound by any means necessary.
So August 1990, Pitchfork have broken up, and then suddenly two bands pop into existence just across those 8 weeks: Rocket from the Crypt and Drive Like Jehu, both of which would go on to make quite a mark in alternative music in different ways. Drive Like Jehu, this was when Froberg and Reis came together again after Pitchfork. The band was completed by a guy called Mike Kennedy and a drummer called Mark Trombino, who also became a producer. He worked with Blink-182 and All Time Low and a bunch of others. Mark, quite familiar?
Quite famous for working with Jimmy World and making them taking their sound to the next level. Like, he's single-handedly responsible for that transition that they made to basically being big glossy pop,
So that's where he came from. That was his genesis in the industry. Drive Like Jehu only released 2 albums. There was a self-titled one in 91, and then there was Yank Crime in 1994 on Interscope. Drive Like Jehu is a far more sophisticated beast than Pitchfork, but it does use a lot of the same basic ingredients to get there. There's an innovative use of guitar, again, percussive noises, these kind of squalls of noise, absolutely like 32s on the strings and stuff, and dissonance is a big feature. But the structures are more ambitious and definitely more elaborate. For example, the intro of the 4th track on Self-Titled, it's called Oh Pencil Sharp, it has 3 minutes of building tension. Like all this intricate noise, then it erupts into this kind of boisterous post-hardcore song for 3 minutes. And then drifts away across another 3 minutes in this really esoteric fashion. It's a 9 minute plus song, which was one of those kind of first wow moments in a post-hardcore movement. Like, I mean, even in Yank Crime, you're talking like 10-minute songs. You know, they really, really went to town. There's a track on Yank Crime called Luau. It's the fourth one again. They seem to like that fourth track being really long and self-indulgent, that kind of like shape. There's even a prog rock sensibility to some of the arrangements and structures, and I think that's what marks out Drive Like Jehu as something really unique. I don't mean prog rock in the kind of extremely complex modal sense, but I think their willingness to take people on journeys. Like, the tracks don't just get in and out, they actually indulge themselves in these long building tension passages, and tension's a really big thing with these bands anyway. Bands that I know well, like Macrocosmica in Glasgow, that's Brendan O'Hare, who was in Teenage Fan Club. We went on to do this kind of proggy riffy thing. Huge fan of Drive Like Jehu. They're another band who almost started doing this kind of alt-rock prog, and that was inspired by this comfort in, hey, this bit's actually quite cool if we stretch it out for 2 minutes and then shock people by bursting back in. So yeah, and they also, by the way, used unusual tunings, which is something that they took from Sonic Youth, but the ability to mess around with the tuning of your guitar and the ideas that would throw up, you know, the droning and things like that, and the strange dissonance that you would stumble across from these different tunings. Yank Crime, the second album, it will probably remain Froberg's only major label release, unless something were to be reissued on a major for some reason. As I say, they definitely didn't water down the formula for that major label release. I mean, it arguably gets even more obtuse and uncompromising. The songs get longer and weirder. Rick actually said, it's in that interview with Jim from At the Drive-In, that they went with Interscope because it was genuinely the only major that offered them total artistic freedom. They just said, yeah, just do what you want, and so they literally did just do what they wanted. The band stopped, I think, really due to John Reis being so busy with Rocket from the Crypt, which we'll talk about in a second. But Drive Like Jehu, you reunited in 2014 for a big show in Balboa Park in their hometown of San Diego, and then they actually did some touring on the back of that, kind of spurred on by the success of it and the buzz that they got from it. Rick Froberg had moved to New York City in 1998, so that was like after that project had broken down, and obviously artwork's a really big part of his life story as well. He'd graduated from just designing flyers and designing covers for his own records, ended up doing exhibitions and stuff that's a lot more elaborate. In fact, even did some animation. In terms of Drive Like Jehu, Ferro, I'm guessing you're a big fan of them.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, today it's kind of a amusement park ride for me. Everything is incredibly at the center of my musical inspiration. I mean, I Drive Like Jehu. You were mentioning the fact that we were playing long songs, you know, and this comes from, I think there were some historical precedents. Can you say that? Historical episodes? Like, think about Askerdu, Zen Arcade, Recurring Dreams. I think it's 9. Yeah, there were some episodes, you know, of, like long songs, you know, from hardcore bands, from bands that were already considered post-hardcore. Some things by Black Flag, second era Black Flag, quite extensive.
Side B and Damage kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. But you know, they brought it to another level in a way, because you know, apart from Askerdu, which I think, you know, follow the similar inspiration, kind of musical inspiration, in terms that, you know, you get the feeling that these songs are literally driven by the emotions, you know, so you cannot like put a time limit to these waves of emotions, you know, and so therefore you get this very long, like it's almost like an emotional trip, you know, it can last 3 minutes or 9 minutes according to the to the way the musicians are inspired while they're playing. There's an element also of almost jazzy element to it, but not in a technical way, in the sense that, you are like so caught up in your playing that basically you forget about any time constriction.
Yeah, there's a freeness.
And there's a freeness, exactly. Exactly. There's a freeness to it. Coming back to Drive Like Jehu, I think Young Crime, the second album, spawned a whole generation of bands. If you think about all the bands that came out, like Captain Jazz, and all those bands who came out second half of the 90s or early 2000s, more or less.
Late 90s,
All those bands, like Swing Kids, all those bands were like playing like they were possessed, I don't know if you ever seen them live. There was this element of a total being completely taken away by the music, and also this incredible intensity, I think it was very much inspired by Drive Like Jehu. I don't know how many people saw Drive Like Jehu live. Not many, I think, because I don't know how much they toured. I mean, their lifespan is very short. But I think that a lot of the approach that these bands had came from the desire to replicate that intensity that you get when you listen to records like Young Crime. And I think that together with Fugazi, they represented, for me, one of the ways in which you could play high energy rock music in an interesting and progressive way, but progressive in the way that Chris was meaning, I guess, so in a way that it was not trite, it was not boring, in a way that was still interesting, for the audience and for yourself. Finding out new things and trying out new things. They've been a very important band for setting a guiding light in a way, Not only them, of course, but they certainly were one of the bands that really brought things forwards in terms of guitar rock. Let's call it big. In an era in which there was a lot of things. There were a lot of things coming out. We're talking about the early 90s, so it was a very fertile era for rock music. But even in that context, they sounded somehow futuristic. Somehow a step forward.
Mark, this is a band that you had brushed with before this. What were your feelings?
Young Crime, I mean, I could definitely hear where a lot of the kind of post-hardcore stuff that I liked would take some of his tendrils, or some of the tendrils coming from this to that. I think really when I kind of jousted with them back at the time and really enjoyed it, it was mostly because it did have some mathy elements. It wasn't, like Ferro said, it wasn't conventional. Mm-hmm. And it does feel ahead of its time. You listen to it now, it does feel a bit anachronistic actually. Yeah, but out of time. And I think that is just down to a result of the fact that these were guys that were just wanting to try and push their songwriting in different ways, maybe spurned on by that Sonic Youth influence of just like, fuck it, let's just try something new and just follow the muse to our heart's content. And I think that's quite a great thing, and that's what a lot of punk is, right? It's similar to jazz, I guess. It's about just following the muse and see what happens, really. The fact to be able to do it on a major record label, I think, is also something which I don't think should be understated.
Yeah.
I really don't think it should be.
He seemed quite acknowledging of that as well. Mm-hmm. What you're saying about Sonic Youth, it seems very much like Rick is the one that's more outspoken about the impact that bands like that had on him. John has a lot of other influences that seem much more down that kind of Bo Diddley blues, classic sort of greaser 60s garage sort of vibe, and you can really see the distinction because at the same time as they were doing Drive Like Jehu, John Reis was doing Rocket from the Crypt, which is a very different proposition. So, I mean, without a doubt, the most commercially successful of the various groups that we're talking about in this orbit. On a Rope being the very obvious example. That's a track that landed on the UK charts at number 12 and made the leap to those kind of best such and such album in the world compilations. You would hear in amongst all these famous chart names, you would hear this On a Rope by this band Rocket from the Crypt, and it was a little bit odd to now think that that's this band that came from this extremely underground movement, but they did, you know. They were on cover mount CDs on mainstream publications as well. It got them on Top of the Pops. That was a big moment. That album, Scream Dracula Scream from 95, also on Interscope, was a commercial high. Produced a couple other singles, Young Livers, Born in 69. The follow-up to it was RFTC, Rocket from the Crypt, and that was in 1998. And the thing that's a big gap for a band that's just had a lot of success, you know, between 95 and 98. I think there's a sense that they sort of missed the boat a little bit with the time that took. It wasn't a great commercial success, and the label basically dropped them eventually. There's a lot to say about Rocket from the Crypt as well, and there's an episode in there. They have a lot of records, and some of them are fascinating releases. So I guess in brief though, you know, they used stage names. That was a big thing that started to become a feature. Like John Reis has had a number of them, and this Speedo being probably the one that people know the best. They leaned into the retro aesthetic and the greaser look, that kind of diner culture, almost like a Buddy Holly-esque Happy Days. There's a bit of that sort of thing as well. And they made some really anthemic punk rock music that managed to scrape the edges of wider acclaim whilst also remaining pretty credible amongst its peers, which is no small feat. In 2000, Rocket from the Crypt lost their drummer, and they were basically less active for a spell as they tried to replace him, and John Reis used that as an opportunity to undertake a few other projects. I mean, just skimming past it, but your thoughts on Rocket from the Crypt, guys?
So On a Rope was a song that was kicking about on music, on MTV and stuff like that, and Kerrang TV when I was coming up in the early 2000s. I mean, I got that record, even I didn't know at the time it came out in 1995. I thought it just came out that last year. Yeah. So they still had some cultural cachet in those kind of circles, you know. And
by the nature of it, it was kind of timeless. You know, the fact that it was so deliberately retro sort of allowed it to skate over the new metal movement and all of that stuff, because it wasn't trying to be contemporary, you know.
That 60s garage rock vibe that they had, you can hear it in Hot Snakes. It's just different. It's just done in a completely different style, in a different way, because it's got Rick Froberg involvement as well. But you still got that energy to it and that feel. Atom Willard, their drummer, the drummer you're talking about who left, he's one of the best drummers in the world, particularly for punk rock music. You know, he's playing for Alkaline Trio now. He played for Against Me for a long, long time. He used to play for The Offspring when their original drummer left. He's very much become a bit of a gun for hire in some ways. I think he left either to join The Offspring or to join Angels and Airwaves, one or the other. But yeah, he's a fantastic drummer, a really great player. He's just gone on to do his own thing and been in various different bands of note, serious bands of note, I guess, in a lot of ways. But they replaced him with the guy who plays drums in Hot Snakes, right? Mario Rupcala, who's also fucking great. Yeah.
Who we've mentioned before, by the way, because he's also the drummer in the Black Heart Procession.
Yeah.
Very different musical proposition.
Totally.
Yeah.
Ferro?
Oh yeah, I mean, in Italy you say you're breaking through an open door. I mean, Rocket from the Crypt were one of the greatest bands I've ever seen live. One of the greatest live bands I've ever witnessed. You know, amazing. I saw them 2 times. Both times during the Scream Dracula Scream World Tour, which was very long. Once in a festival and once in a club. I missed them another couple of times, which I regret, because then they obviously split up. But such an amazing band, incredible live show. Everything you want to see in a rock and roll show brought together with greatest conviction and showmanship. And, you know, it was brilliant. Like, it was a good time, and the sound was amazing. Like, you know, they look fantastic. They did spat fire on stage. They had a wheel of songs where you could choose the songs. You know, the septics were decided by accident. You know, by the wheel. You know, Wheel of Fortune.
That's cool as fuck, by the way. That's really cool.
All those things. You know, it was amazing. Like, they had dancers. You know, they had a guy who was basically just dancing and playing the maracas, and 2 guys playing the horn section. It was the full thing. You know, the rock and roll show hyper rock and roll show. And they had the moves of the MC5, the ferocity of the Stooges, the speed of the Black Flag, fantastic live band. The records are super cool too. I mean, Hot Charity is a great album. Very short, 27 minutes, but amazing. If you want to listen how you can combine horn section with a full-on guitar band, listen to the album. I mean, especially the first track. And Scream, Dracula Scream too. Obviously, it's the signature album, but also Circa Now, the record that came before Dracula Scream. It's my personal favorite. It's an incredible band. They did loads of singles, split singles, 10 inches. There's a great 10-inch that now is almost forgotten, called The State of the Art is on Fire. Which is one of the best 10 inches of my collection. A great band, amazing. I mean, always a good time. Generous performers, incredible. And you can hear, yes, you're right. You can hear something of the Hot Snakes already. I mean, a few elements of the Hot Snakes, but obviously they're into a much more, if you want, traditional rock and roll, punk rock context when it comes to Rocket from the Crypt.
So as I said, when Rocket from the Crypt went in that kind of break in 2000 looking for a drummer, John Reis turned his hand to a few other things. He started Swami Records, which, I mean, as you mentioned earlier on, Ferruccio, there's an entire movement behind this scene, and Swami became really integral in that. They put out a lot of really great bands. I mean, one that comes to mind is Beehive and the Barracudas. Whom I think Gar played for originally. But yeah, released a lot of stuff from the San Diego area. There's a lot of really good records in that back.
Blind Shake, another good trio.
Right. Yeah. John went on to do some stuff solo called Back Off Cupids. Another band that he got involved in 2000 was Sultans. He actually initially played bass in that band, I believe, and later moved on to the guitar. And the remit of the band itself was to kind of strip back the arrangement. Reportedly, when they recorded, it was done really loose and fast, and they used to borrow equipment for it so that they weren't too comfy with the stuff they were using to give the music this really spontaneous feel. I think they've got 2 albums. He was using the stage name Slasher for that one. They stopped about 2007, but I think around about 2011, Sultans did a one-off show at John Reis's Bar Pink, a place that he co-owns in San Diego. And as with most of the bands in this orbit, you can hear lots of common DNA. Sultans has those fingerprints all over it, the downstrokes on the guitar, lots of pick attack, big dollops of retro, but also it's very contemporized. There's a track called Shakedown, for example. That's an absolute ripper, and it's guaranteed to appeal to Hot Snakes fans in the process. Around about that time is also when he started Hot Snakes. We'll go into their stuff in a little bit of detail shortly. Basically, as Ferro mentioned at the start, he wasn't satisfied with his own vocal and so approached Rick, who he'd worked with in Drive Like Jehu and Pitchfork, and Rick said, yeah, let's try it, even though Rick at that time was on the opposite side of the country. So John and Gar were in San Diego and Rick was living in Brooklyn. The band kind of pitched itself in opposition to the distortion of Drive Like Jehu. I think they described it as like letting Rick's voice and the attack of the pick carry the power, not using excessive amounts of distortion pedals and things like that, really playing hard and dynamically. There's also Obits in 2005. Rick started that project. That was based around Brooklyn. The name, apparently, by the way, was a comment on ageism in punk and rock music. Their second guitarist, Sorad Habibian, had a really nice comment on them. He said, jazz musicians and classical players are allowed to get long in the tooth, but rock and roll is stuck in this youth culture rut. So we wanted to put a stake in the ground and say that middle-aged people could make rock music that was relevant, vital, and worthy of being part of the cultural conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Hell of a...
I know how that feels.
Yeah, I was going to say it's pretty on the nose for this podcast, isn't it? Obits did 3 full studio albums, really good records in different ways. But yeah, Obits are a great band, and you can hear different sensibilities in Obits because Rick is kind of fronting that project and John's away doing something else, and there's some absolutely brilliant tunes on it. There's a couple of tunes that are almost post-punky. They've almost got more of an 80s feel to them. And then there's also those kind of garagey and retro influences in there as well. Really, really good band, one that we could talk about in and of itself as well. And probably the last band in this orbit that we really need to focus on is the Night Marchers. Almost the same time that Rick was doing Obits, John Reis, Garwood and Jason Kourkounis started Night Marchers with a guy called Tommy Kitsos, who'd been in a band called CPC Gangbangs. In a lot of ways it's Hot Snakes minus Rick and Rick's influences. As a result, you know, there's a lot of striking similarities with Hot Snakes as well. The main difference I would say is Reis's vocal, which live is a bit more melodic, a bit more retro. On record, his voice is often slightly distorted to try and compensate for the lack of that Froberg gravel that Rick just seems to have. They used overdrive in John's voice, and I'm not sure that it always works all that well. To me, Night Marchers come across as more conventionally punk. You know, his voice is delivered in a way that's slightly snottier, and although the differences are really, really subtle, I think it lacks that bit of character that Rick had. But the writing is often just as frenetic. You know, there's some really strong hooky choruses thrown in there as well. The project does lack that weird late 80s SST touch and go element that Froberg was so into, and I think that's what I'm trying to say. When you're able to separate the guys like this, you see, not hard and fast, but you see by and large what people were bringing to the party, and this doesn't have that big Sonic Youth thing running through it, so you can start to see how Drive Like Jehu worked between these two guys, what the different components were and where they were coming from. Reis cites comparisons of that band to things like early Status Quo, the Flaming Groovies, the Wipers, and a guy called Michael Yonkers. Ferro, we've spoken of Michael Yonkers before. He's seen as being this really pioneering guitarist for the 70s onwards, used kind of noisy and drony guitar techniques at a time when not a lot of people were doing that. I believe his own personal health injuries, he had a spinal injury, seem to have contributed to him never really gaining the acclaim that his music probably deserved. There's stuff by the Michael Yonkers and the Blind Shake that is a great example of that brought into the modern. I think in the past, Mark, we've briefly mentioned a record called Carbohydrates, Hydrocarbons.
Hey, what's the problem? Carbohydrates, hydrocarbons. I don't think that you will ever know
That's a really good album. I would recommend dipping into that one by Michael Yonkers and the Blind Shake. But yeah, big influence on John Reis.
You're right. I mean, when you listen to all these bands, especially when you compare Night Marchers and the Obits, you can see the which elements are brought to the table by both guys, by Rick and John Reis respectively. What, for instance, I think I like the Obits. I love the Obits. I have both albums and I listen to them a lot. But for instance, what the Obits lack compared to, for instance, Hot Snakes is like the kind of drive that John Reis brings, like the kind of drive, intense drive, that carries the song through. But on the other hand, you have the sonics, elements, that Rick is so enamored with, and obviously his vocal delivery. John Reis has a different flavor to his vocals. He's more, like you said, more rock and roll, more like if you want more 60s, style. Whether Rick's style of singing places, amongst other things, places the Hot Snakes right in the center of a kind of post-hardcore 80s climate, It's got that urgency, that urges, the rasp urgency. Whether John is more of a rock and roll singer in the style of Rob Tyner from the MC5 or those kinds of people, so kind of soulful, Yeah. John tends to be like my soul rock and roll, kind of R&B also sometimes.
So it kind of brings us to Hot Snakes themselves. Now, 4 albums and 4 studio albums and a host of other wee bits and bobs beside. They also appeared in the 2005 Tony Hawk's American Wasteland soundtrack, the game soundtrack, performing a cover of Time to Escape by Government Issue.
Oh, wow.
Someone at the front, outside, someone screaming, get up, time to escape, time to escape.
Now, as I understand it, Hot Snakes wasn't originally really envisaged as being a kind of long-term project. They were certainly something of a DIY band, though, for the most part. They were released by Reson Swami almost exclusively up until Jericho Sirens, and recorded and co-produced by him too. The artwork, meanwhile, was done in-house by Froberg. I think the only caveat really was that they weren't self-booked. The tours that they did do were done through an agent. But other than that, a lot of it was just completely bootstrapped. The first record they brought out, Automatic Midnight, was first thing ever released on Reis's Swami Records label. I believe that Reis and Kournikas had written most of it before they actually approached Rick Froberg. One thing about this, so I had this on CD, the cover, when you see it reproduced, is black and white, except all the CDs came in an orange plastic case. So for me, this was always the orange album. And then whenever I see it reproduced or on vinyl, I'm like, what the fuck is this white issue of this? In my head, this will always be a vivid orange and black album cover, but it's actually not. I mean, in my mind, and certainly from memory, this was the weakest of the releases, of the 4 releases, and I'm not really sure why that idea got kind of bedded in. It just seemed to. But going back to it for this, I was a little taken aback by just how good the writing is on it. I mean, I think the record definitely lacks the production finesse of some of the later works. I mean, when the bass comes in, the low end is a little bit excessive. I mean, it's a deafening sub that's on it. I mean, thinking about the situation they were in, that could be due to where it was mixed, as much as to how much it was intended. If this was early days for Reis taking the lead on producing projects, I don't know what his speakers were like, I don't know what his studio was like. Maybe he didn't have a low sub monitor, so maybe the sub was mixed a little bit too high, or it could indeed just be totally deliberate. I did see that Froberg said in an interview there's no actual bass guitar on this record. It's the keys and then the low end of the guitars that seems to be doing that. Now, that was in that interview with Jim. That was just news to me, but there you go. Either way, for me, the sound of the record does detract from it very slightly, but pound for pound, the writing and the tracks are as good as much of the band's output. To take a wee whistle-stop tour of them, I mean, the first one, if credit's what matters, I'll take credit.
Forget
It absolutely rips out the starting blocks in this with
It's a
some of
good
the
song.
yeah, with some of their best guitar interplay, and the bass dropouts in it are perfect, as are those sort of suspended, dissonant guitar passages that accompany it. Great song, really, really high impact. Automatic Midnight. It also has a bit more of a kind of Rocket from the Crypt gang chanty chorus. Which wasn't something that really was a big feature of Hot Snakes, which maybe, betrays how much of a role Reis had in writing it. The third one, No Hands, a crunching Hot Snakes style riff in it. Brilliant example of one guitar absolutely battering away, while the other guitar, by contrast, does these complacent little ring-offs. They're really... The two guitars take such a different line on this tune. There's also a fantastic bridge in this. It's only about 45 seconds into the song, but the guitars kind of intertwine on it. It's brilliant. I mean, it's easy to rave endlessly about these. Salton City, the fourth track in it. Now this is where I think you can really hear that these are people that were in Drive Like Jehu. This is probably why this album is slightly better on re-listening than it is in my memory, because tracks like this one have grown on me a lot more over the years. I think when I first put this on, I just wanted the bangers, but Salton City shows a whole other dimension to what they were doing. The beat itself forms a terrific hook, and the way they use the Telecaster tone in it is stunning. Like, if you're a Telecaster player, this gives you the tingles. There's also Kim Thompson provides this really quirky female backing vocal in it that's a really fun touch.
Yeah, I share the same impression as you. I mean, I used to consider this album as the weakest of the four albums released by Hot Snakes. But, by doing this, by preparing this podcast, I mean, I've been going through, obviously, the whole discography again. And this one is amazing. It's an amazing album, I didn't remember it. I didn't remember it this way. I remember it as a not disappointed, but said, because I was coming straight from Rocket from the Crypt. I was coming straight from that influence, so I wanted some more of that in a way. The new John Reis, I was expecting like an assault. From the first to the last track, and it starts like this. Automatic, the title track is amazing. Automatic Midnight, yeah, you're right. But it's great also because it's 1 minute 22 seconds. It's typical of they have this. Some of the best Hot Snakes songs are the shortest. We'll talk about that also when we talk about Audit in Progress. There's another example of a very short song which is absolutely amazing. Is it 1 minute 22 or 1 minute 23, something like that? So it's the first side of this album is fantastic. The opener is like, wow, one of the most feral songs they ever written. I mean, the Hot Snakes. It gained a lot of credit in my rating.
It's aged well. I think the only one that still doesn't work for me is Mystery Boy, the 9th track in it, the one where Reis takes the lead. It sticks out, that song.
It does, yeah.
Without a choice.
It's very Wipersy. Well, the Wipers have been an ongoing influence on Drive Like Jehu, on Hot Snakes, on even Rock for the Crypt, So this dramatic, and this very emotional, expressive delivery. I mean, it's typical of it goes throughout. I mean, this influence their whole discography. In this case, perhaps it's perhaps it's a bit formulaic. Formulaic. Can you say that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
In a Wipers style, That's why it may sound less interested in the other text, but I love it anyway.
I think coming to this band completely cold from a more quote unquote objective lens, this is the weakest of the four. Not bad though, not a bad record at all. It just sounds, the word that pops into my head is it sounds infantile, but it's not. It just feels as though it's not been thought through. It doesn't really feel as though it's a Hot Snakes record, really. It's quite embryonic, I suppose is the word I'm looking for.
Yeah.
It is missing a vital piece in terms of the songwriting. One of the things I really like about this band in general is the fact that they get in, fuck things up and then leave really quickly and pretty much all the songs, which, as you know, I'm a really big fan of generally when it comes to songwriting. But yeah, this one feels as though it's the least Hot Snakes of the Hot Snakes records, and it's still good, but it doesn't really feel as though it connects with me as well as the other records.
Yeah. No, I was just saying that I was surprised by how good it is, compared to. I used to rate it less than the others, but perhaps the other records are more accomplished, but this one's pretty good. I mean,
that's good. That's a good record. Yeah, that's a good record.
I mean, there's definitely songs on it that would comfortably make a best of.
Exactly.
A playlist that we certainly are going to put together for this anyway. So there's a couple other odds and ends. You get the Peel Sessions in 2005. That was 4 tracks, but it's quite a widely known EP. Brain Trust, This Mystic Decade, No Hands, and Automatic Midnight. Brain Trust is a throbbing bit of rock music, and I say that as somebody whose band did a cover of it for quite a long time. It is a workout. It's a lot of fun to play, but I think Automatic Midnight probably steals the show on that EP. It's a brilliant version of it. There's the Thunder Down Under live album from 2006. It was recorded at Triple J Studios in Sydney during the last Hot Snakes tour split, but pre-hiatus. It's fun actually on that, in between the tracks, hearing them debate what song they're going to do. It's a bit like that analogy about Rocket from the Crypt spinning the wheel for their set list. It just suggests that they had this vast arsenal of songs, and it wasn't like they went into the studio and worked out exactly the set for this radio session. They were like, we'll just turn up and decide on the spot which song we're going to play, and it just shows you how fucking good this band were. I think on that record, Plenty for All particularly stands out. It's such a jubilant bit of music anyway, and hearing it done so pristinely in a live setting, you just can't help but be really impressed by how good the band are.
You guys want to do that? ¿Listos?
In 2011 they had a single called Do Not Resuscitate. Now I've only heard the shitty YouTube uploads of this tune. I am not sure, and certainly our friend Brian probably has a copy of it, Ferro, but I've never heard the really hi-fi version of it.
Me neither.
It came out in the midst of this sort of indefinite hiatus that they were on, and I think honestly of their standalone singles it's probably my favourite. It feels like a single. It has melody. It has a self-contained vibe. I can't tell if it was maybe just at the time a curio that they'd found lying about but really wanted to get out there so people could hear it, if they didn't know what the project was going to do, if it was going to do anything else. Regardless, a terrific wee song. It's got a much stronger 60s sensibility, so I'm not sure if that sort of suggests that Reis had a bigger part in it. There's not really any big structural surprises in it. It's just simple, melodic, energetic, doesn't hang about. Here's a big one though. In 2018, they did get back together again. They brought out an album called Jericho Sirens on Sub Pop. Just a wee bit of the background to this, some tongue-in-cheek quotes by John Reis in the official press release. I considered stopping playing guitar on a social media poll after I completely mastered the instrument, but so many people kept sending me letters and voicemail messages asking me at the dry cleaners or the butcher shop to bring back Hot Snakes. They were missing rock and roll music. I've always considered Hot Snakes to be more in the vein of proto-Vogue movement of the early 70s, but to these people, this is their rock and roll. I understand that. I totally understand people's desires to be controlled and humiliated by my guitar. Anyone can play the stupid guitar. What they want is for me to use it as a branding iron. Rick Froberg commented on the album title and theme. No matter where you look, there's always people saying the world's about to end. Every movie is a disaster movie. I'm super fascinated by it. It is hysterical and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It snowballs like feedback or my balls on the windshield. I have no fucking idea what that last comment's about. Reese also said, a lot of the other Hot Snakes records always had tension in release, but this one is mainly just tension. In 2018, during the publicity run for Jericho Sirens, Gar Wood had said there were already 2 more records, quote, written and recorded. So, who knows if that stuff will ever actually emerge. This album features both of the drummers on different tracks. So Jason and Mario, who we've mentioned, had been in the band at different times and different albums, and it sort of became their touring lineup, was that they went on tour with 2 drummers who would jump in and out on different songs, which is just super cool.
That's so cool.
Really weird.
Have you seen them? Have you seen them in that lineup? I saw them in Bologna. Yeah, it was brilliant. Yeah,
absolutely. And you have to keep checking to see who's playing what song. Like looking up. Yeah, I mean, the record starts in really combative mood as well. And whilst the standard is really high, the only thing I'm unconvinced about on this record is the structure or the track listing of it. I think the first 3 tracks in particular, right? I Need a Doctor, really bombastic opener. The recording sounds terrific. Is this one of my favourite tunes by them? No, the melody isn't strong in it, and as they said themselves in that preamble, the tension doesn't really ease. It's more about this unsettling angularity, which I think it's also emphasised. Ferro, you were talking about how they were quite innovative in an understated way. The way they sort of mess around with the shortened bars as well, changing back at weird times is quite unsettling. And the first 3 tracks all follow this pattern of just being really, really quite harsh and caustic and unsettling. Candid Cameras and Why Don't It Sink In? They both come from these really uneasy, dissonant places. I mean, albeit they're at very different tempos. Put it this way, it definitely isn't the sound of a band mellowing as they get into their 50s. It is a really, really quite fierce opening to this record. And actually, I think, for me, by my tastes, I don't think it's the optimum way to intro it. I think it's a bit too much off the bat, because the 4th track comes in, 6-Way Hold Down, and that's where I kind of feel this album actually comes to life. We're back in Hot Snakes territory. The melody returns. I mean, the song is still really urgent.
Song, that.
It's dynamic. It's got that power, but it's also got big hook in it. And for me, that's, if not the first track, it's maybe the 2nd track on this album. Just strike that balance just a little bit earlier. and we wait a little bit too long for that relief, which, as you know, isn't to say I don't appreciate adversity or dissonance in music. I just don't think it feels very Hot Snakes, to be perfectly honest.
Compared to the other records, you know, it feels as though it's quite unrelenting.
Like they almost had something to prove, like we're back
pretty much,
and we're older, but that doesn't mean we've dialed anything down at all.
They've always been quite sinister sounding. I think they've always had a bit of a sinister sound, and it's maybe dialed up a little bit too much on this. Like Death Dweller, for example, is maybe a bit on the wrong side of that for me. It feels as though it's sinister for sinister's sake almost.
Another one where they're fucking about with the bar structures and stuff as well. It's impossible to get your foothold in that song. Whereas Jericho Sirens, right? I mean, I think it's a melodica that they start that one with. By the way, they use it in a few different things.
That does that.
Total tub thumper of a song, like stomping through this grumpy verse and pre-chorus, but then it blossoms into this brilliant sing-along chorus. Super simple, but it's really, really effective, and it's such an important track on that record in terms of lightening the mood a little bit. I mean, albeit the subject matter's pretty heavy, but
agreed.
Yeah. Death Camp Fantasy. Absolutely fucking love that song. I think it's probably the best track on this for me. Most rock and roll tune on it. I fucking love the structure of the verses and the weirdness of that extended bar that just keeps it unusual. Stops it from being too symmetrical. The gang vocal things there, and you can hear Rick appealing to the other singers, come on, for the gang vocal coming in the back of it. I love that. It's a nice kitschy old fashioned feel to that. I think, as with the best Hot Snakes stuff, they slide a couple of brilliant melodic interwoven guitar passages in here, and the ease it. I mean, that chorus hook as well is just fucking brilliant. Slightly minor keyed, but just tremendous.
Yeah, I was going to say this. I think that song is the one that gets the aggression of the record and the hookiness that they can be often quite good at, but really don't explore too much.
Yeah.
Which is what I really like about them as a band, actually. You know they can go down that route, you know, from their past. You can quite easily, like, write a... Well, we know John Reis can write a fucking album full of hooky bangers, you know what I mean? So when they turn that out, sometimes it can be quite incredible, and I think this one really captures that aggression, but also a good hook, and probably is one of the best songs on the record for me, I think.
I mean, I think Psychoactive and Death of a Sportsman are also really strong songs. Psychoactive's got a great chorus on it. And I think there's Death of a Sportsman with the tambourine and stuff, that little bit of extra sparkle in the melodica and the scooped bass distortion in that. It's a little bit of a different texture. It's a really lean record as well. It's 10 tracks. As I say though, my only beef would be I think the order doesn't necessarily bring out the best in all the tracks. I think it's just a little bit too harsh from the off. I will say as well, I love the photo that's on the cover, but it seems so out of step with the rest of their albums. There is just a slight aesthetic beef for me there, where I'm like, all of the other records have that similar aesthetic quality of Froberg's art, and even though the cover of Jericho Sirens is a very cool photo of one of the band members surfing, it just doesn't quite fit in the catalogue as a result. I don't know, but
Well, I suppose like Thunder Down Under's it's got a picture on the cover as well. It's not get the same hand-drawn thing,
but it's not a studio album, so I can live with that. You know?
Yeah.
Other stuff, I mean, there's a couple of standalone singles, both came out in Sub Pop. There's one called Checkmate, which I think is a totally decent tune. It's kind of mid-paced by their standards. The video is this gonzo kind of budget thing with their faces on iPads and someone smearing a guitar with shaving foam, and as is their want as a band as well, they go in this sort of deviation during the bridge which gets really dissonant in a kind of Drive Like Jehu style. And the last single there in 2020, the standalone I Shall Be Free, it's a pretty bombastic wee tune, not an obvious single, at least not in the sense of having any designs on widespread success or radio play, but it's a strong song that I think would probably be found normally quite early on one of their records. I do love, there's a wee cheeky chord adventure that they drop into the bridge though that shakes things up. That's really nice.
Yeah, I just want to say a couple of things about, if I can, about Jericho Sirens.
Of course.
I think it's a fantastic album. I think it's if I wasn't so close to, as an personal experience, to the two albums we're going to talk about, this would be my favorite Hot Snakes album.
Interesting. Okay.
I share Chris' observation about the set list. Yes, it's true. I mean, when Six Wave, Hold Down, and Jericho Sirens come, it's like a crowning achievement. Like you get, oh yes, here we are, But I think the three songs before that do a great job in preparing that moment. You know what I mean? Like I love In the Doctor. I like Candy Camera too. But yeah, I agree that some of the best songs are somehow not hidden, but not placed in the obvious places. I mean, I guess Jericho Sirens at the end of first side works very well as being the title track. But have you noticed that all Snakes always have the best title tracks? Like the title tracks are always great tunes, they're always amazing. Those, there's this correspondency between the title track and the greatness of the song, and it being a title track. And That Camp Fantasy, yes, absolutely. I mean, it's That Camp Fantasy and Six Wave Hold Down are probably two of the best. And yes, Psychoetic and Death of Sportsman are a great closure. Yeah, the best things about this album are always towards the end of each side. I agree with that. Apart from That Camp Fantasy that opens the second side, but it's a fantastic album for me. I mean, I was so happy that they came back so strong. After almost 15 years. So it's incredible. That they did such a good album after so many years. And of course, there were some singles sparsely released, but this one is a banger. I mean, I'm so sorry we probably will never get to hear the other things where they were working on.
Yeah, well, we don't know because Rick was working on number 5, and Garth said that he already had 2 albums worth of stuff recorded. So I wouldn't be surprised if Swami did put out something that was approximately a new album or the remaining recordings or something like that. But yeah,
Rick did say last month that the album was very near done.
Yeah.
So which actually kind of makes it a little bit more tragic because it's clear the album was very close to being finished, and then sadly passed away the same month he said that. Yeah. So maybe it will come out. It might not come out the way they maybe originally intended it to, but it might still be released in some fashion.
So let's jump 6 feet first into these 2 records, the 3 of us. Ferro, do you want to go first, or will I? We do it chronologically or reverse chronologically? Mark, you're the neutral.
Yeah, let's do it chronologically. Makes sense.
All right, it's me then. So I chose Suicide Invoice from 2002. First of all, one of the iconic Rick Froberg artworks. The cover of this record is fucking brilliant. brilliant. I think both this and Automatic Midnight as albums suffered a bit from the inability to tour them far and wide, due to the geographical constraints of where the members were living at the time. And that's actually despite it getting much more traction in the UK. This one, yep, Ferro's holding up a vinyl copy of it. What a peach that is, man. Beautiful. And it was, I first heard this, I think it was the result of a cover-mounted Kerrang compilation curated by Casey Chaos. There's a lot of C's in there. But yeah, curated by Casey Chaos of the band Amen, and I'm pretty sure that's the first time I heard them. They used the song Paid in Cigarettes, which we'll talk about in a second. Compared to all the other albums in their canon, this one has more variation in tempo, and I think can safely be regarded as the darkest in places. Not the most aggressive in places, but the most sombre in places.
For sure.
It's the only one to begin, for example, in an understated, kind of mysterious fashion. And that sensibility alone really reminds me of the Drive Like Jehu days, the way that the first track eases in. It should be said, we've covered this phenomenon in the past many times, Mark, that this is where I got into this band, and so I do acknowledge that my opinion of the album is definitely coloured by the nostalgia factor of this being my access point. It's also an album with kind of stages or phases, maybe in a similar way to the likes of Nevermind. For me, some passages of it are outright pessimistic and a bit slower, and then there'll maybe be 3 tracks in a row that are blistering and tuneful and sort of bittersweet. It seems to have sort of phases, which I suppose to some extent Jericho Sirens does as well. But yeah, in terms of the tracks, that first one, I Hate the Kids. First things first, by the way, listen to this with your right earphone popped out, and you'll hear just the live amp sound in the seconds before that other guitar joins in. They didn't fade it out, they didn't fade it up. As soon as the album starts, you just have the kind of static hum of a valve amp sitting waiting to be played. And I don't know, there's something really geeky and really cool about the intimacy of that. You're right up there in the room as he's about to do that take for this album, and I just really get a buzz out of that. Wait, I Hate the Kids, as familiar as I now am with the song, it's still a peculiar way to start this record when you look at the ways they started other records. The 2 guitars are on completely different planets during the verse in terms of their approach. The one in the right speaker is just chiming away on these chords, and the one on the left is doing these really erratic, sparse little lines with like string bends and stuff in them. There's a drop down kick in at about 2 minutes 20, and the minor passage that then resolves is absolutely brilliant. Really, that bit in particular is very little like the sound of any other band I could think of. I mean, this is a very idiosyncratic tune.
Yeah, it's a really moody start, isn't it, compared to the other records? And I like the bass sound that they often go for. Like, it's not particularly obvious sound, it's just really low and rumbly. Yeah, it's more felt than heard, I think, which I quite like. Is it the melodica in this one as well, I think?
Yeah, they like a melodica.
I said it was harmonica. I thought it might have been harmonica.
Or harmonica?
That makes sense.
No, melodica. The one with the wee pipe that you blow into.
Yeah, it's definitely melodica. I didn't know that's what it was until you mentioned it earlier on. I was like, oh yeah, it definitely is one of them. One of the things I like about this song, and I like about the band in general, is the guitars always sound quite clattering. That they're just kind of clattering off each other.
Yeah, I had my Italian beat. There's a Morricone. I mean, also in Jericho Sirens, there's kind of a Morricone influence on that. They love cool. That.
Absolutely, I've got Morricone-esque in my notes. Yeah, John
Reis is famous for being a big spaghetti western fan.
Okay, that's
cool. So I guess that's where it comes from. This wow, this sounds eerie sounds. With the melodica mostly. Yeah, I wanted to be a bit of my national pride.
Represent your. So Garth forgets his insulin, which by the way apparently based on a true story. The second track charges in and just slams the album into a much higher gear. sounds a lot more like the Hot Snakes that people probably expect. I love the use of the double snare strokes in the verse. It's a really, really simple thing, but it's very distinct, dead effective. And that snare double stroke thing goes on to form a big part of the outro of this song as well.
Mm-hmm. No, I like the vibe of it. It's a lot more direct, a lot more rocking, which is they do that really, really well.
Yeah, I mean, they get into a little bit of a swing of that, because XOX, absolutely classic Hot Snakes. I think one of their most iconic chorus riffs as well. And that line, "You're sick in the mezzanine," the guitar part that goes behind that is fucking brilliant. Super angular, really fuzzy and thick sounding. Even the dramatic minor refrain that leads back into the verse is just a touch of class. There's also some really nice John Reis backing vocals in the right channel in this one as well.
It's got a great hook, that chorus, the XOXOXOX thing is really, really good. Yeah. Lots of really interesting guitar melodies. The structure's generally quite cool as well. It feels quite gritty and aggressive. They always do feel quite gritty and aggressive, but they never really feel heavy or super high gain or distorted. It's all very much in the delivery, as opposed to the actual tone. Although the tone is aggressive, don't get me wrong, but it's not like...
Well, that was their remit. They said they wanted to have a band where the weight of the sound came from the playing and not from relying on pedals and saturation.
And that's exactly the greatest lesson that you can learn as a musician from them, because they come from a school of playing that doesn't rely on gear too much. It's all about, and you can see it when they play live. It's obvious. The way they also the way they use single note patterns, instead of power chords all the time, in order to create those guitar textures, and you get the power from the whole band, the dynamics of the whole band together, rather than somebody putting on a super heavy wall-to-wall distortion pedal. This is a pre-metal influence kind of sound, because grunge did a good thing, which was legitimizing metal, because metal was unjustly considered a B series style of music in the 80s by serious rock journalists.
Yeah.
But these guys, the good thing these guys have in terms of playing is that their brand of alternative rock was developed outside of the straightforward metal influence. So they work on guitar dynamics rather than extreme distortion. This is, one of the greatest things that you can learn from a band like Hot Snakes. It's the use of dynamics. They are masters of that. They're masters of that.
And you can hear how accurately they can reproduce it in their live records. When you listen to Thunder Down Under, you can really hear how close they are to the recordings, because the recordings capture so well what the band was about. The fourth track, Who Died? I think if I had to pick one song as an avatar of how Hot Snakes sounds, it might well be this one. The chugging downstroke riffs at one side and the guitar on the other side squealing and bending the string, the tasteful dropouts in the pre-chorus, then a barreling chorus hook that you're the one who died. It ticks a lot of boxes for the fast Hot Snakes stuff.
It's got a sort of 70s feel to it, which I quite dig, I guess, going back to that kind of garagey sort of thing. But yeah, it's quite catchy.
Now, Ferro, you were saying earlier on about how the standout tracks are often title tracks. The one thing that I think really makes this album stand out again from the other three examples is that the title track, Suicide Invoice in this, it's peak songwriting for the band, but it's very patient and very unconventional, whereas the other three title tracks on the other three albums are quite immediate and quite satisfying and direct. This is like guitar and bass, all very meticulous, packed with like snaking drama, two intertwined guitars again. The chorus, for example, it's far less anthemic, and it's got a bit more of the kind of theatre about it. It's almost like throwing your arms open with dramatic lights behind you and flares going off and stuff. It's something very theatrical about the delivery in this one. It's not that charging, singable one that you get, for example, on Automatic Midnight or big chorus like Jericho Sirens or something like that. It's a little bit unusual in that sense. Now, in terms of what really does deliver in that, Paid in Cigarettes. That track that I said was the first thing I ever heard by this band on that compilation. For my money, probably their best song overall, even to this day. I absolutely fucking love this tune. A really unusual drum line that really disorients as it bounces off that guitar in the verse. The second guitar joins and kind of travels up the neck to lift the chorus, that cough it up section. The second chorus continues into this brilliant, melancholy, recurring bridge that then serves as the song's main melodic hook. And that melodic hook comes back a second time prior to the ending, leaving, I don't know, it's just a beautifully mature and balanced and innovative song that for me gets every single ingredient of this project in just the right measure. I don't think anybody sounds like this apart from Hot Snakes either. There are influences you can identify, but this particular mix of innovation and hookiness and rock and roll and weirdness, because that is a fucking weird beat at the start, by all standards. I just think it's a fucking absolute masterclass, that song.
The polyrhythms and Suicide Invoice are great, the way it kind of breaks down the arpeggios, and in this song as well, it's really downbeat, it's weirdly catchy, but I fucking love that build up in the outro section. Like, for me, that totally makes the song. And his drumming does make this record like even more interesting. There's interesting guitar parts, but it's very unconventional in the way that he's accenting certain beats, and it's pretty good.
LAX, it's a simple driving number that could sit really well on pretty much any of the records. It's much more frill-free than some of the other experiments on here. I think the timing of those second guitar and bass bursts in the chorus is terrific. And there's a really cheeky root change near the end that gives it a lot more oomph. By Nancy Boy, another direct kind of pacer tune, counteracting those slower brooding moments we were talking about earlier, and lifting this album back into that category of high paced. I would say though, By Nancy Boy is probably the least essential song on here for me. I still like it, but I don't think the album would have suffered without it. But this is what I was talking about, phases, because this now in this phase of like a lot more energy. I think actually 9, 10 and 11 have a lot in common with each other. The way Paperwork starts, it's like a standard sort of charging ahead Hot Snakes tune. But it flourishes into this almost like gothy psychobilly. There's almost like a David Lynchian quality to that chorus.
It's pretty clear to me any upside I'll ever see it's gonna have to be underwritten by you. Your place in history supposed to be and instead of me.
It jumps around keys and it just reaches a whole other melodic level in the complexity. I think Paperwork is a fantastic song.
It feels cinematic, that song, almost, and melodic, and maybe not cinematic, but melodramatic, I suppose.
Yeah, there's a lot of melodrama in it, yeah.
Yeah, and which is why I really like it. And the riff after the verse, after the second verse, I've got this one riff that pops in, it's just fucking brilliant, man. Love that riff.
Why does it hurt? I mean, it's not similar, but to me it occupies a similar space in my head. You know, it doesn't get more down the line than that for Hot Snakes, you know.
What are you used to be? What do you prefer? Your head is all the meant be. Why does it hurt? You've been on your feet, you ain't had sleep.
Nice even bars, kind of high register verse, then a minor key chorus that allows him to lower his voice. But where this track succeeds, where some of the others, especially some of the other albums, sometimes fail, is the ability to then get that dose of brilliant melody in the chorus alongside all those other sonic ingredients.
I know your heart is in the right place. Why does it hurt? Your head is in your lap, babe. Why does it hurt? I know your heart is in the right place.
This is another one that just injects a brilliant bit of melody just at the right time. And I think that's actually consistent as well with Enlisted, another song that manages to take this obstinate sort of like, I mean, what is the timing on that fucking verse riff? It's really fucking strange.
When the skin clears up inside of my hands, they think they ought to know something.
I think that track's a masterpiece that hits any number of melodic and musical payoffs in less than 3 minutes. It's got that weird looping asynchronous guitar part. The pre-chorus on it's brilliant. That it's fine to have business sort of section.
It's fine to have credit. It's fine to have business. Where you persuade. If you ain't fit to drink, I like the way.
That in itself's nice, but the true chorus is one of the band's best moments.
Like the way things worked out. I'm not hopeful. I'm not listed. I ain't scanning back. And there's nothing I've missed.
The actual chorus in this song is so strong. The fact that then comes around again and the big hook in it is doubled, you know, it's extended for that extra indulgence. I think that's so gratefully received as a listener as well. Like the band, the writers of the song knew what we, the audience, would want from that song, and that second time, the fact that they just go through it one extra round to give us that little bit of extra juice, I mean, it's unrivaled garage punk. And I think all those 3 songs are a really nice triumvirate of like weird aggressiveness, but just all infused with a just so much melody that, and that's what really came to define this band for me, and why they stood head and shoulders above so many of their peers, as well as so many of the people that were involved in this project. I mean, the album finishes with Ben Gurion, which is a great song. It's slightly different to those. But Ben Gurion, by the way, Israel's first Prime Minister, I cannot parse what the message is in this tune, even from reading the lyrics. It's obviously political in some measure. There's a line in it: build the IDF a high-rise on Cortlandt Street, and when they die, gonna leave it to me. Ferro, there's some big cut guitars on the main riff to this song. It has a more jovial feel to it, including the use of the tambourine. I think that lightens it a bit, and the chorus is more kind of template Hot Snakes.
There's plenty of space out there. You
The end refrain as well, with the shifting root notes and that new pattern, is a really great outro. It finishes the album with a flourish, but as I say, there are just some phases earlier in this record that make it just peerless. Just peerless, like just the absolute peak of this style and formula. In conclusion, it's their most complex. It's, as I said, I think it's their darkest album. We're not talking about Kid A here, but in the context of their music, I think it is. Yes, Audit is faster and heavier, and Jericho Sirens is more abrasive to start with, but the mood here, for some reason, just feels darker. It also, with that in mind, it also has some of the band's best melodic payoffs, and those are so well rationed, and they're so well placed to sweeten some of the harder passages. That's why I think this is just their Goldilocks moment. And it's a record that I enjoy just as much now as I did in 2002, and that's really saying something.
I think the latter half of this record's got quite a Rocket from the Crypt feel to it. It's got some of that swagger, which I quite liked. I was quite pleasantly surprised about how much I enjoyed this record and how much I enjoyed both records, actually. I think it's going to be difficult to try and tease them apart, I think.
No, this one is undoubtedly the most the deepest Hot Snakes album, probably. Together with the last one, together with Jericho Sirens. I mean, in a way, because it's got this, as you said, this moodiness and these moments which are not necessarily what we associate with their typically aggressive sound, like the opener, for instance, the opening track. And strangely enough, this record is from 2002. I don't know if we've been influenced by that or not, but in 2003 we released an album called Bare Bones, which starts very strangely for a Cut album with a similar song, a song that kind of slowly grows into
an exercise in
chorus. Yeah, an exercise, exactly. As you said, it's a very deep album. Also lyrically, it's interesting, it's the album that sounds more somber and deep, and at the same time extremely melodic. And it's a masterpiece in dynamics, in the guitar dynamics, in the way that the songs are constructed. As I said before, I'm always impressed by the way, because you rarely hear like riffs. Those are riffs, but they are somehow repetitive guitar textures that intertwine with the other guitar,
Absolutely.
And which is a way in which, for instance, in Cut, we work a lot like that. It comes to this, they haven't invented that. Fugazi do that a lot. There's a lot of bands that, are working this way. But they are the masters of the of the last 20 years in terms of that. They are a few bands that still work in that, playing hard music, tough music, but not necessarily using traditional riff, construction based on basic riffs. It's a very interesting and dynamic way of playing rock music that it's really rewarding. It's really satisfying to me. It gives me a lot of pleasure. Yeah, that's it. That's all I wanted to say about this great album. I mean, because for show business reasons, we have to pick.
We have to stage a fight, stage a disagreement.
But to me, this one is fucking brilliant. I could have picked this one easily.
It's a bit of a kayfabe break there, Mark.
Yeah, exactly. You wanna fabricate a rivalry, just like those bastards at the NME and Melody Maker.
All right, Farewell. Okay. Over to you for your Audit in Progress case. Approach the bench, convince the jury.
I'll do my best. As I said, when this album came out, talking about their third album, which precedes their first split. And I have to say that it was the first album that really made me think that, in a way, both John Reis and Rick Froberg, mostly John Reis, because Rick Froberg hadn't been as active as John Reis, had found a way of conveying the energy of his other projects into the Hot Snakes. Whether before you can see the influence of Like Jehu, the Pitchfork. Of course, you can hear Rocket from the Crypt. In this album, it sounds a bit like a Hot Snakes album played by Rocket from the Crypt, in a way.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's got an unrelenting energy. Yeah. The first two tracks, Brain Trust and Highlights, especially Brain Trust.
'Cause
It's got this percussive almost and circular riff, short circular riff, very influenced by, at least it sounds to me a little bit like Fugazi, in all the Kill Taker period, songs like Public Witness Program. Obviously, it's a breakneck speed, delivered at breakneck speed with super incredible energy. It's a great track, And you said you were playing a cover of it.
Yeah,
we
used to do it live. It was a Punisher. It's a lot of fun, but it is an absolute Punisher. Yeah.
Yeah, these songs are not easy to play.
They're not easy to sing as well. See the energy that Rick Froberg put into his voice, because he was often singing. He's got a kind of note. He's got like a sort of got a pitch that he works at. But my God, it takes a lot of effort to get up there and to sing with the velocity that he sings as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Because it's a very underrated singer, Nobody mentions him as a singer, but he's got this delivery and it's got this urgency in his voice, this necessity. I don't know, it's typical of a lot of the best hardcore and punk rock music. He retains that quality.
Yeah. It's a gift. A lot of the other things that happened in Rick Froberg's life were the result of his work and his learning and the way he wrote, the way he drew, the way he played guitar. He got himself to those points. But Rick Froberg was born with a voice that you had to be born with, and it's a specific kind of voice that breaks in just the right way and is pitched in just the right way. And John Reis knew it when he actually said, this music doesn't sound as good as it could if we can get that guy that I used to play with to come and sing in it. He had to get a guy from the opposite side of America, a country of 330 million people, to be like, this music won't sound right until that guy sings it. Rick Froberg was born with a voice that only he had, and it's a fucking brilliant voice. It is not your typical glorious singing voice. We are not talking about Total Eclipse of the Heart here again, Mark, but we are talking about an idiosyncratic and very, say, one of a kind, but just a natural gift that the guy had a special quality to the way he sang that couldn't be replicated, basically.
Yeah,
incredible voice, incredible expression. Anyway, again, artwork by Rick Froberg. Have you noticed that he has a style similar to? Have you ever heard about Gross, this German illustrator from the Weimar period in Germany? He was like depicting scenes of
this rings a bell. I think you may have spoken to me about this before. Yeah,
George Gross. It was like depicting like society, like decaying German society between the two wars, just before the rise of Nazism in Germany. And Rick Froberg's style, especially this painting here with these two soldiers, it looks like a German soldier, Rick Froberg has got a style that reminds me of this guy. Mm-hmm. Anyway, this album, as I said, it sounds like a Oztek's album played by Rocker from the Crypt with so incredible energy. The first two tracks are typical like attacks.
Totally unrelenting. But I think, but unlike Jericho Sirens, the openers also have big doses of melody, because Highlights is it's a very oddball construction, a bit like the ones that start Jericho Sirens, but it makes you wait, but there is a payoff, and when the payoff in Highlights comes, it's huge. It's a brilliant, brilliant payoff, and that juddering, awkward melodic thing that they do that ricochets around, that melodic aspect is what differentiates these Furious tracks from the Furious tracks on Jericho Sirens for me. Okay, yeah, I don't have the same. I think that the Jericho Sirens tracks have their qualities too. But I understand what you mean. Yeah, in fact, Braid Rust and Highlights are among the highlights. Just as pardon the involuntary pun.
It feels a little bit more direct, angrier, and more angular as well in the last records, which I quite liked about, particularly Brain Trust, but also highlights that it's also got some spooky guitars in the middle eight, kind of garagey, almost sort of kind of surfy stuff going on in the middle eight, which I quite liked of highlights.
I really see going into the third track, Retrofit, the way that verse is played on the backbeat that makes you sort of swing, and then the hook shifts to the front beat. It's a really clever change, very simple, but it works very well.
What about the main riff? That's King Crimson, basically via Sonic Youth, via Fugazi. It's very King Crimson if you think about it. Red Period, which is an odd influence for Hot Snakes. But I wouldn't be surprised if a guy like John Reis, King Crimson might be amongst his listening pleasures.
In places.
And it's a great riff, it's like I don't know, 21st century Schizoid Man kind of Hot Snakes version. It's incredible. And then, as Chris said, he develops this great balance between the chorus and the strophe, we say in Italian, and the verse, which is typical Hot Snakes dynamics. Creative Control is like a typical Hot Snakes anthem. Great chorus, and it precedes one of my favorite lyrics by Rick Froberg, which is "Think About Carbs." I love that song. How can you compete with all you cannot eat?
See, I want to just jump in a second. Actually, so you've talked about lyrics. I'd cut off my dick for Creative Control, and Creative Control is a fucking excellent. Sorry, I wanted to mention that I forgot. I was carried away. But another thing I want to pick up on, Mark. You mentioned a spooky guitar line earlier. See the riff in Creative Control. It's almost Scooby Doo. It's got like a kind of cheeky, kind
uneasy,
of mystery quality to it. It's one of the main pivots in this album, that song. Like, it's a really essential moment in the album where you want something really substantial.
It's catchy. How can you say it's
when you were talking about Think About Carbs as well, Ferro, that middle eight with a kind of the tremoloed dive, the
there's some nice bends on that. It's pretty good.
That's John Reis, that typical John Reis.
It's almost a guitar solo, but it's not quite. It's almost a guitar solo.
It's an anti-solo. It's really strange. Audit in progress. Absolute rock and roll. Like, there's so many nods to old school kind of garage classics, but with that really melodic, dynamic chorus that modernises the whole thing.
Exactly.
They don't do it very often, but it's got a 4 on the floor garage beat, which
exactly
they don't really use that very often.
It's in the tradition of great title tracks by this band, and it's often placed. Often the best tracks are placed at the end of the first side, and this is the case. Audit in Progress is like a fantastic tune, as you said. It's got this traditional garage beat, but obviously mixed with the weirdness of typical of the guitars in the case of the Hot Snakes, and it's a brilliant track. Hatchet Job. great start for the second side. They didn't play too often.
That rising chord thing, the escalating tension thing that they do at the end of it, it's a big feature of that song.
The outro is almost half as long as the song itself.
Yeah.
It's a minute 40, and the song is 3 minutes 40. Do you know what I mean?
That's
The
right,
outro is, I think, probably a little bit too much on the outro, but yeah.
I mean, that's one of the least essential tracks in this record for me. I think it's fine, but I mean, it does a job there as well. But I think it's in the shadow a little bit of this Mystic Decade.
Exactly. Between my 4 and 5 favorite tracks of this album.
Yeah, this is a big cut vibe to me as well, man.
The driving riff, and also the almost motoric beat, almost krautrock kind of beat. It's got, very straightforward, but it's got something that reminds me of Noi, of those bands,
Yeah, I think you can hear quite a lot of Obits on this one as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
He's singing in a slightly lower register, which I think is a bit more comfortable for him. It's a little bit more groovy and a bit less furious.
True. Yeah, a brilliant track. I love it. Lovebirds, organ-based, strangely enough.
Weird. It's weird for them.
Weird song. Yeah,
total departure. Song. But I've actually got that written. Even this definitely isn't one of my favourite songs by this band. However, it's really vital for this record in terms of mixing it up and changing the textures and the tempos. It's basically a song that, even if it's not all that amazing in and of itself, it improves the album. I think it gives the album a depth and a moment of pause. Yeah.
Yeah, it does. I like when the organ starts to clang against the kind of guitars at the end, and the organ's got like a sort of phaser on it, I think.
Yeah.
It's just dead. It's really unsettling, I quite liked it, though. It's pretty mental, actually.
It's got this noise breakdown, experimental breakdown in the middle. And then when I first heard it, obviously I said, oh, what is this, But now, as Chris said, in the balance of the album, it really brings a depth that it's needed. Also because after that, there are two typical bangers.
Yes.
Reflex, and Hair and DNA. Another interesting lyric by Rick Froberg.
By the way, Reflex, that bit with the key changes, has got that spy thriller. It's like James Bond in a Ramones t-shirt.
Yeah. That's cool.
Great definition. Yeah, I love this definition. That's why I love this album, because, exactly, it brings together all the best characteristics, like the 60s influences, the punk rock delivery of Rocket from the Crypt, together with the intensity of Rick Froberg's songwriting, of Rick Froberg's lyrics, of the typical dynamics, guitar dynamics and rhythm dynamics. It's got Mario Rubalcaba on drums. His playing is incredible on this album. It's like a machine. It's a machine. Like it is incredible. His performance is pristine. It's out of this world. And Hair and DNA. It's if you want an archetypal Hot Snake song with a driving 4/4 beat, it almost crashes against the an odd time part at the end of each verse,
Mm-hmm.
and then it makes it start again. Like it's like the song restarts every time. It's whether it's still driving, it's still going, but you have this verse that with this from the floor rhythm, and then it turns into an odd time rhythm, and then it starts. Why would you bother to write a song like this? Only because because it's fucking complicated.
It is.
It's not easy, and it's not an easy task. But it's so satisfactory, because it doesn't lose energy, it doesn't lose communicative qualities. And at the same time, you have a feeling that you're listening to something that is not staid and it's not boring, it's something vital. This is the greatness of this band. And Plenty for All,
right,
guys.
So, I mean,
one of the greatest songs of the last 40 years.
Absolutely.
One of the greatest songs since rock and roll started.
This is...
See that lead guitar riff? It reminds me of Britpop. It's like got a Britpop feel to it, that lead guitar.
Yeah, whatever. It's got a bit of Northern Soul in it. It's got a bit of punk rock, but it's just a great song. And it's got everything in it.
We actually spoke about this on the compilation we did during COVID, which was End Songs. We had a mixtape that was like final songs and albums, and this was one of mine, is one of the greatest final songs in an album. I mean, a delightful guitar refrain. It really is just a jubilant guitar refrain. By far the most optimistic thing I think the group ever recorded, going across. I think it's mainly built on those major changes with the occasional drop down to the minor. The tub thumping in it is brilliant. Even the way that there's like a status quo chorus thing, like the guitar thing, it really calls upon status quo, the way they mentioned them. They name dropped him earlier. It cruises back out of this tunnel onto the open road of the verse again. It's a total delight. Like, it really is uplifting, anthemic. Also, there's loads of like little kind of haze and yos and little shouts in the background that you can hear. I mean, it's a total fucking masterpiece, that song. I love it.
Yeah, your listening experience ends with on a high. It's something. It's a great album. It's a great album. Manages to be uplifting, which is So no, I mean, I love this album. I mean, I love every release from this band, but this one really, really, really stuck with me.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all agree, right, that Auto Midnight is probably on balance the weakest by very small margin. I think Jericho Sirens for me is probably on balance the third favourite. Is probably a nicer way to put it. I would probably put this as my second favourite, because even though there are some absolutely unbelievable songs in it, there's also a few that I'm just not too bothered about. Whereas I think Suicide Invoice for me is just a little bit more daring as an album, and almost every song has an unbelievable hook in it at some point. Even, in the kind of later period of the second side, they managed to jam an incredible hook into, Paperwork, into Enlisted. They all have an incredible moment in them. And I think there's a few in this one that are fine, but they don't have that incredible moment in them. And I think that's probably the difference. But to be clear, we're talking very fine margins here. I think this band have never done an album that's less than great, but I think they've also, in the case of these two, done absolutely exceptional records as well. So hence why I went the way I went.
For Audit and Progress, I would actually disagree with you. I think they take more risks in Audit and Progress. They go in weirder directions and just try and
that's true.
expand their sound in ways that you just didn't see coming, because you can never really see what's coming with this band. That's the cool thing about them, is you never quite know what the next song holds, and then it does something you're like, oh, all right, I guess they're doing that. That's interesting. That's cool. That works. Or for the most part, it works. You know.
And they managed to make it sound consistent yet varied.
Yeah, totally.
That's pretty remarkable.
Yeah. For me, Suicide Invoice just pips it because it is more consistent across the board. I just think it's more consistent. More of the songs feel vital, feel like they deserve their place on the record. Whereas I agree with you, Chris, there's a couple of songs on Audit and Progress which I don't think really, like Hair and DNA, I think that song probably could be lost. I don't think it would affect the record at all. It's still a great record.
Yeah, it is.
You know,
I
think if you like both of them, then you've already won.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely maintain that I think Hot Snakes are one of the most consistent bands as well. To have 4 records and all 4 are definitely worthy of being recommended. You know, if someone's like, oh, I'm going to go, there's none that I would say, oh, don't listen to that one. Like, they're all good.
Absolutely. I mean, the only one I would place slightly underneath the other 2 is Automatic Midnight, but just because of the reasons we mentioned before, you know, those 3, Audit in Progress, Suicide Invoice, and Jericho Silence for me are basically on the same level. I have to say, you know, yeah, you can say Jericho Silence would have benefited from a better setlist choice. I agree with that, but overall quality, I mean, I think they are on a par. They are brilliant albums, like the best, probably. Not without probably definitely some of the best rock music that came out in the last 30 years. I mean, without any doubt, you know, it's incredible. You know, let's hope that, you know, this there will be more bands like that. If not Hot Snakes themselves, if they will continue, it seems very difficult without Rick. Perhaps there is going to be some developments in the future. I don't know, and maybe another band. It's hard. It's a huge loss. Yeah, you're right. It was 55 at the beginning. We were having
right. Yeah,
55. Yep. Right. Yeah.
He's got a hell of a legacy to his name.
Yeah.
He has an incredible catalogue of stuff to his name, and he's a guy that I am certain we'll come back to. I mean, I very much think there'll be a Drive Like Jehu and a Rocket from the Crypt episode somewhere on the horizon.
And I'll be there. I'll be there when you do it. I want to be there. Maybe we could do we could invite Brian. We can do a 4 or 5 thing, a huge debate.
Just a bunch of guys debating their favourite Rick Froberg record. It's what the internet podcasting world needs, doesn't it?
I don't care. This is my word.
Nexus time.
A complicated series of connections between different things.
Nexus
yeah.
time.
Oh, goodness me. So
I'm ready.
weeks and weeks ago, we pulled the bizarre name Barkevius Mingo Mingo out of the pot, courtesy
Barkevius
of Chris Hind. Thanks, Chris. Obviously had to look up who that was. Barkevius Mingo, also known as Kiki, by the way. He's an American footballer. His name was given to him by his mum, Barbara, by adding her first 3 letters of her name to the name Kevius, which she supposedly liked, as though Kevius is a well-known name as well. By the way, a couple of details here. In 2020, Barkevius Mingo was traded for a player called Jadavion Clowney. And Jadavion Clowney also has a cousin who plays college football called Demon. So Demon Clowney. Honestly, I just think it's like the USA's just run out of sensible names. I think that's what it is.
Have you ever seen you can see it on YouTube, there's 2 or maybe 3 Key and Peele sketches. It's basically like a sort of kind of NFL, they're kind of introducing all the different players, and they've all got really ridiculous names, like all of them, and it's just them basically like playing these different characters and going, the boy from this school and stuff like that, and it's fucking hilarious.
It's incredible,
man.
The names that you stumble across looking through high school and college football in the States as well. It's just mental.
Totally. They're just lamping the fuck out of that. It's brilliant. It is so good.
So
recommended.
Ferro, you don't have a Nexus, but Mark, you and I do. I suppose technically I'm meant to go first. Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, go for it.
Right, okay.
Mine's is going to be quite short, so.
Okay, so tributes were paid to Rick Froberg recently by loads of people, obviously. There's a whole thread of them on Twitter. One was by a fella named Justin Brannan. He is currently the 43rd District Democrat Council member for Brooklyn in New York City. Justin Brannan also started a number of bands. He's like a vegan, straight edge guy, very cool. He had founded the hardcore groups Indecision and Most Precious Blood as well.
Oh my God, I know both of those bands.
There you go. So he's now a councilman in Brooklyn. So he also founded a death grind band called Caninus. Right?
Caninus, I've heard. Is that the one with the dog
Yeah.
that does the vocals?
So,
yeah.
This features Brannan, Rachel Rosen, and Colin Thundercurry. There's a fucking great name as well. Plus Basil and Budgie on vocals, and Basil and Budgie were female pit bull terriers. The band had 3 releases on War Torn Records. One was a split with Hatebeak, which is a band featuring
It's got a parrot for a singer.
with Waldo the Parrot on vocals. So Hatebeak's releases used to have a theme, and so they had things called Number of the Beak, Beak of Putrefaction, which is fucking brilliant, and they had one called The Thing That Should Not Beak. Alright, the latter is obviously a pun on the Metallica tune. Metallica is a band that has gone on record saying they will never play the Super Bowl. James has been quoted as saying they are not a variety show and they refuse to fly around on zip lines or mime, as most of the artists do to some extent.
Why not?
And one person who did perform at a Super Bowl is Lady Gaga, who did the Super Bowl 51 halftime show. Barkevius Levon Mingo, the outside linebacker for the New England Patriots, won Super Bowl 51.
Yep, that was in 2016, yeah. That's pretty good. So mine is John Reis used to play in the band Rocker from the Crypt, and their first drummer was, as we said, the brilliant Atom Willard. Atom's played in a bunch of bands, like I said, Against Me and Laura Jane Grace solo project. The band's called the Devouring Mullers, so it's Laura Jane Grace and the Devouring Mullers. And like I said earlier on as well, he's just recently announced as a new drummer for Alkaline Trio after Derek Grant left the band. So despite being from San Diego, he's done quite a lot of work in Chicago. Laura Jane Grace lives in Chicago. Alkaline Trio are a Chicago band. When Laura Jane Grace announced that she was trans in 2020, one of the people to support her, one of the first people to support her and big her up was CM Punk. You know, Chicago's finest son, CM Punk. Apart from being a cantankerous motherfucker, CM Punk is also really well known for being a massive, just general sports fan. He's a big fan of the Blackhawks, big fan of the Cubs, big fan of Chicago Bears, who are the NFL team. In fact,
a bit like Ferro, he's also prone to a kayfabe break as well, isn't he?
Yeah, very much so. His return to wrestling in 2021 for AEW was actually mentioned during NFL programming in Chicago Bears coverage. And aside from being a massive fan, he actually recently got quite annoyed about the fact that there's a Green Bay Packers linebacker called Aaron Rodgers, and he was compared to him because they do look quite similar, and people kept saying that, and he was raging about that because it's not a huge deal to us, but the Packers and the Bears have got a massive rivalry. Like when the Bears formed in 1920, their first rivals and therefore biggest rivals are the Green Bay Packers. So he was very unhappy about the fact he was compared to a Packers linebacker when he's a big Bears fan. But Chicago, Barkevius Mingo, he played for the Chicago Bears for one season in 2020 and was signed on a $1.18 million contract. He appeared in 16 games and only started 3 that season. Then he was traded to Houston, I believe, and then he was subsequently dropped from the team because something to do with minors, basically.
It's a dismissed charge against him. He was accused by somebody of interfering with a young boy, but the charges have been dropped.
He got dropped for the team. He
did, yeah. His lawyers,
so he's not played since.
His lawyer spoke about how he was disappointed at the team just immediately dropping him, but that's what happened.
Yep, so he's not played since, but yeah, that's Barkevius Mingo. So only 32 as well, so I guess he's not too old to be playing in the NFL. Probably getting up on a bit.
Well, he got 1 point whatever million for 16 games. It's not a bad rate of pay. Okay, well, I don't know what we're going to do next week, but we'll pick another name out of the tub. Preparation, and that name will be Chris Martin.
Chris Martin
of Pectorals.
Pectorals.
Yeah.
Okay.
Courtesy of Corey Robinson.
Not that Chris Martin, another Chris Martin.
It specifically says Chris Martin of, quote, Pectorals with a Z. So there's some shenanigans afoot. But there you go. We'll be linking that to somebody next week. Ferruccio.
I see what he's done there. Pectorals was the original name of Coldplay.
That's interesting. That's a very strange fact as well. Ferruccio, you managed to get through this podcast without bursting into flames. Well done, big man.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, I don't know about tomorrow, but
long may it
hopefully
continue, man.
Yeah, it's going to continue for a couple of weeks like this. So,
well, don't worry. As a result, we've got howling winds and gales. So, cheers.
Okay.
What are you going to do?
But yeah, thanks for bringing your expertise to the party. I'm really glad you got to pay tribute to a guy who's really had an impact on your own personal musical life as well. Same here. It meant a lot. It's what little we can do to honour the guy's memory. Hopefully somebody goes and checks out this stuff as a result. Rick Froberg, he'll be missed by a lot of people. Join us next week. I don't know what that'll be, but it will be a thrill ride. It'll be hilarious. There'll be highs and lows. There'll be shenanigans. There'll be love. There'll be loss. Everything.
All of it.
All of it.
Complete gamut of emotions.
See you then.
See you. Ciao from Bologna. Bye.